Montana Territory, 1882. The wind cut sharp across the prairie as Dawson Briggs rode into the valley, his coat dusted from the trail, his boots lined with dried mud and gilt. The debt he carried was not written in ink, but it had weight just the same, heavy, personal, overdue. He pulled his horse to a slow stop in front of a weathered cabin nestled between two cottonwoods. Smoke rose steady from the chimney. Someone was still here. He had half hoped they were not. Dawson swung down, his spurs clinking softly. He adjusted the brim of his hat, squared his shoulders, and stepped up to the door. He did not knock. He owed her that much to face her without hiding behind wood or words. The door opened before his hand touched it. Penelope Morgan stood there, barefoot, a shotgun braced against her hip. Her dark hair was tied back, her face streaked with ash and sweat. Behind her, the fire crackled low, and two small children sat on the floor drawing shapes in the dirt with sticks. "Dawson Briggs," she said flatly. "Penny. Do not call me that." He swallowed, nodded. "Penelope." Her eyes narrowed. "If you came to collect, you can turn around right now." "There is nothing left to take." "I did not come to collect," he said quietly. "I came to pay." Penelope stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "You cannot pay back what you cost me." "I know." Her voice cracked like dry timber. "Do you?" Dawson looked down at his hands. "I should have been there. When Thomas rode out, he asked me to watch over you and the kids if anything happened. I told him I would. Then I left for Arizona 2 days later." Penelope's jaw tightened. "He died protecting your cattle from rustlers. And you vanished." "I know," he said again, voice rough. She stared at him a long moment, then lowered the shotgun. "You can stay the night in the barn. If the kids ask, you are no one." He nodded. "Thank you." Inside the cabin, her daughter, Rosie 6 years old, with her father's eyes ran to her and tugged her skirt. "Who was that?" "No one," Penelope said quietly, brushing a hand over Rosie's hair. "Just a man passing through." And yet that night, when the wind howled against the walls and the cold crept in, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering the way Dawson used to laugh, the way he used to look at her before he rode away. Before her husband, his best friend, died in his place. The next morning, Dawson was already splitting wood when she stepped outside. He worked with his sleeves rolled up, each strike of the axe purposeful, like he was trying to carve something solid out of what he had broken. "You do not have to do that," Penelope said. "I do," he answered, not looking up. "Let me help." She crossed her arms. "Help with what? Raising 2 kids alone on land that barely grows potatoes?" He paused, breathing hard. "Let me try." She hesitated, then turned back toward the cabin. "Suit yourself." By noon, he had fixed the leaning fence and cleared the overgrown path to the well. Rosie and her younger brother, Reed 4 years old, quiet and serious, watched him from a distance, not sure what to make of the stranger who worked like he was trying to earn something more than shelter. That evening, Penelope found Dawson sitting on the porch steps, his hat in his hands. "I did not just come to pay back a promise," he said, voice low. "I came because I could not carry it anymore. The guilt, the silence. I came because I wanted to see you again." She sat beside him, arms wrapped around herself. "You do not get to come back after 4 years and say that like it means something." "I know." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the sky turn gold, and then purple. The kids were inside, already asleep. The land was quiet. "I loved you before you married Thomas," Dawson said finally. "I never told you because he loved you too, and he asked me to step aside." Penelope looked at him then, tears glinting in her eyes but not falling. "You left anyway. I thought it would be easier for everyone." "Was it?" "No." She looked away. "I do not know if I can forgive you." "I am not asking for that yet," he said. "I am asking for a chance to stay. To fix what I can." Penelope stood slowly. Her voice was soft, tired. "The barn is warm. Water's in the bucket. Dawson nodded. She walked back inside, but her hand lingered on the doorframe a moment longer than it needed to. The next day, he taught Reed how to hammer nails and lifted Rosie onto the horse for the first time, holding her steady as she squealed with delight. Penelope watched from the porch, arms crossed, but her expression was softer. He was not trying to replace Thomas. He was just showing up. Every day. Quietly, steadily. On the fourth night, during dinner, Rosie turned to Penelope and asked, "Can he stay longer?" Penelope glanced at Dawson, then back at her daughter. "Maybe." He smiled, just a little. Not the cocky grin he once wore, but something gentler. Later, as Penelope cleared the table, Dawson stood beside her. "I did not know how to say it before," he said. "But I would rather pay you back with my heart than anything else I have." She froze, plate in her hand, heart thudding. "I know what I missed. I know what I lost. But if there is still room for me here, even a little, I will give you everything I have left." Penelope looked up at him. Her eyes searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her chest ache. "You cannot undo the past. I know. But maybe," she said slowly, "you can help build something new." He nodded. "That is all I want." Penelope set the plate down. Her hand brushed his, light as breath. "Then stay." The first frost came early. Thin crystals clung to the edge of the water bucket, and the sky held that pale, brittle blue that always followed a hard night. Dawson rose before the sun, the same as he had every morning since she told him to stay, though she hadn't said for how long. He didn't ask. He just kept showing up. Penelope found him near the chicken coop, hammering a new hinge onto the gate. She stood a while, arms wrapped in a wool shawl, watching the way his breath floated white in the air. "You'll need to go into town today," she said. He turned, wiping his palms on his trousers. "What for?" "Flour and kerosene. And if the mill's still got feed, a sack of that too. I'd go myself, but Rosie's come down with a cough." He nodded. "You got coin for it?" Her chin lifted. "I've a sewing job waiting at the mercantile. They owe me $2. Should cover it. I'll take care of it." "No," she said, voice firm. "You'll fetch the things, but you'll use my money." Dawson didn't argue. He just nodded again and reached for his coat. As he saddled the horse, Reed toddled out of the barn, dragging a wooden cart behind him. "Mama says don't forget the salt." "I won't," Dawson said, lifting the boy up so he could ride the saddle horn until the edge of the property. "You help her today, all right?" Reed frowned. "She says Rosie's not to go outside." "Then you help keep her inside." The boy nodded solemnly, and Dawson rode out. It was a half-day ride to town, more if the roads were thick with ruts. He kept to the trail, head down, hat low. He passed no one. By the time he reached the general store, the sun had climbed high but held little warmth. Mrs. Greeley, the storekeeper's wife, looked up from behind the counter. "Briggs. Been a long time. Just here on an errand," he said, laying out the list Penelope had scrawled on the back of a calendar page. She read it, then glanced up. "This for Penelope Morgan?" He met her eyes. "She still keeps her own account, I reckon." Mrs. Greeley's hands slowed. "She's done more with that farm than most would have. Folks talk, but she's never asked for help." "She didn't ask for mine," Dawson said quietly. "I'm just trying to be useful." Mrs. Greeley gave a small nod and began gathering the items. "She's owed for 2 shirts I sold last week. I'll mark the rest on credit. She's good for it." He didn't correct her. On the ride back, he passed the wagon stuck in the ditch. A man and his daughter worked to lift a broken wheel from the mud. Dawson dismounted without a word, helped right the axle, and tied the wheel steady with rope until they could reach a smith. "You with that widow up on Dry Creek?" the man asked as Dawson prepared to leave. "Yes." The man didn't press. Just tipped his hat. "She's a strong one." "She is." Dawson got back late. The sky had gone pink and gold again, the way it always did before a cold night. Penelope had a lantern lit on the porch. He tied the horse, carried the sacks to the kitchen, and set them down, careful not to stir the sleeping children on the pallet. "Rosie's fever broke," she said. "She'll be fine." He nodded, relieved. "And Reed?" "Fell asleep while peeling potatoes. I let him be." They sat near the stove, 2 chairs angled toward the fire but not too close. She offered him a cup of chicory brew, and he took it without speaking. "You didn't have to fix the wheel for them," she said after a while. "Didn't cost me anything." Penelope looked at him over the rim of her cup. "You always make everything sound simple." "It's not," he said. "But doing the right thing doesn't need to be complicated." She leaned back, exhaling slowly. "When Thomas died, I couldn't cry. Not for days. Not until I found his coat still hanging on the nail by the door. Then it all came out at once." Dawson didn't speak. "I kept thinking someone would come. That his friends would help. That you would." Her voice didn't shake, but it wasn't steady either. "I was in Prescott when the letter caught up to me. I didn't open it right away. I was afraid of what it would say. And ashamed I hadn't written first." Penelope turned toward him. "You think showing up now makes that better?" "No," he said. "But maybe it makes tomorrow better." She studied his face then, the lines that hadn't been there before, the way he didn't look away anymore. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. "You don't have to decide yet." A long silence stretched between them. Then she stood and reached for a folded quilt hanging by the door. "Come inside tonight. The stove's got enough heat for all of us." He rose. "All right." She didn't wait for him, just left the door open behind her. He stepped inside a moment later, letting it close soft behind him. Rosie shifted in her sleep but didn't wake. Reed mumbled something and turned over. Penelope gestured to the corner near the hearth. "You can take the cot. It's not much. It's more than I deserve." She looked at him then, and this time, her eyes weren't guarded. "Maybe. But you're here now." He laid the quilt over the cot and sat on its edge. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Inside, the warmth held steady. And for the first time in years, Dawson Briggs let himself rest someplace that felt like home. A week later, Penelope found herself watching Dawson bend over the root cellar, hauling up the last of the onions with slow, even movements. His coat hung open, and his shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, forearms lined with dirt and frost. She didn't call out. Just stood on the kitchen stoop, apron still tied at her waist, fingers crimped around a wooden spoon she hadn't realized she was still holding. Inside, Rosie's cough had quieted to a dry rasp, and Reed was curled on a quilt beside her, drawing in silence with a bit of charcoal from the stove. Penelope had swept the floor twice already. There was nothing more inside that needed her. "I found a cracked board under the back step," Dawson said without turning. "Looks like it's been taking on water." She stepped down from the stoop. "That'd explain how the mice got in. I'll patch it this afternoon." Penelope drew her shawl tighter. "There's a town meeting tomorrow. School board's trying to hire someone for the winter term. I told them I'd come vote. You thinking of taking it?" She glanced toward the barn. "I haven't taught since before Reed was born." "Still," he said, lifting the basket of onions, "you've got the way for it. I've seen how you talk to them." She looked at him then, and something in his face made her throat tighten. Not because he was handsome though he was, but because he saw her in ways no one had in years. Not as a widow or a mother or a woman scraping by. Just her. "I'm not sure I want to be gone all day. Not with them still so small." He fell quiet, then said, "If it's the work that worries you, I can see to more of it." She raised an eyebrow. "You offering to be nursemaid now?" He shrugged. "If they'll have me." Penelope nodded toward the cabin. "Rosie's taken to you quicker than I expected. Reads slower, but he watches. He doesn't trust easy." "He shouldn't," Dawson said. "But I'll earn it." She looked down at the frost-bitten grass between them. I still don't know what to call you when they ask. You don't have to call me anything. That's not an answer. I'm not trying to be a ghost in their house, he said. If they ever ask, you can tell them I'm someone who should have come sooner. And now that I'm here, I'm not going. Penelope stepped closer, not quite touching him. You say that like it's simple. It's not. But I mean it. She reached out and took the basket from him, her hands brushing his. Then stay for supper. Not just near the fire. At the table. That evening, the four of them ate together for the first time. Rosie sat beside Dawson and leaned into his shoulder when she grew sleepy. Reed watched him from across the table but didn't pull away when Dawson helped him tie his napkin. After the children were tucked into bed, Penelope sat by the stove darning a sleeve. Dawson brought in an armload of dry wood and stacked it without speaking. She didn't look up from her needle. You ever think about marrying? I did once. She paused. What stopped you? She married someone else. She set the shirt in her lap. Was she worth waiting for? I think so, he said. But I didn't wait. I ran. Penelope met his eyes. You're not running now. No, he said. Not anymore. They sat with the quiet between them, the fire casting long shadows on the floor. Outside, a wolf howled far off in the hills. Either of them moved. After a while, Penelope stood and walked to the cupboard. She pulled down a bottle of blackberry wine she hadn't touched since the last town gathering she'd dared attend. She poured 2 tin cups and handed him one. He took it carefully, like it meant something. 2. Trying again, she said. He raised his cup. To making it count. They drank in silence. The sweet tang lingered on her tongue long after the wine was gone. She didn't say goodnight. Just left the door to her room slightly ajar as she carried her candle down the hall. And when she looked back once, Dawson was still watching her, steady as dusk turning to night. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a squat whitewashed building with peeling paint and shutters that hung crooked when the wind picked up. Penelope hadn't stepped inside it in over 5 years, not since before Thomas planted the first winter wheat behind their cabin. But she went now, with Dawson walking beside her and Reed dozing on his hip, wrapped in his coat against the chill. Inside, the benches were smaller than she remembered, or maybe she'd simply grown into different burdens. Miss Avery, who taught for 3 seasons and then married a cattleman, had left behind a tidy ledger of notes, and a stack of slates wrapped in oilcloth. Penelope ran her fingers over them, then stepped back as the school board men shuffled in with their boots muddy and their hats pressed to their chests. Dawson waited outside, pacing slowly while Reed stirred and settled again. He didn't listen at the door, not out of pride, but respect. When she came out nearly an hour later, her jaw was set. They offered me the position. You going to take it? She nodded once. I start Monday. 3 days a week, mornings only. If I bring Reed, I'll need someone to help tend Rosie. I'll do it, Dawson said. If you trust me. I wouldn't ask if I didn't. They walked back toward the wagon where Rosie waited beneath a quilt, thumbing the edge of a rag doll. Penelope climbed up and took the reins while Dawson settled beside her, Reed now awake and blinking into the sun. You were quiet in there, she said after a while, keeping her eyes on the road. Didn't seem like my place. It is now. At least part of it. Dawson turned his head slightly. What changed? Penelope didn't answer right away. The wagon creaked over a shallow rut, and she guided it gently around a patch of ice forming in the shadow of a hill. When she spoke, her voice was low. I saw the way Reed leaned into you this morning. He doesn't do that with just anyone. Dawson looked down at his hands. He's a good boy. He needs more than good men passing through, she said. They both do. That night, she let Dawson read to Rosie from the worn book of stories Thomas once kept by their bed. The girl curled against his side, listening intently to each word, her lashes fluttering as sleep pulled her under. Afterward, he carried her to the cot with careful arms and tucked the quilt around her as if it were his own daughter lying there. Penelope stood at the table, folding laundry with slow precision. "You're gentle with them. I've learned the hard way not to take any moment for granted." She didn't answer that. Instead, she set down the last shirt and turned to face him. "You ever think about what it means to stay for good?" "I do," he said. "Every day. My neighbors still whisper. Some don't think I should let a man live under my roof who isn't my kin. I can sleep in the barn again if you'd rather." "That's not what I meant." Dawson stepped closer, but didn't reach for her, didn't cross the space unless she asked. "I don't care what they say," she went on. "But I do care about what kind of life I'm building for them. And for me. What kind are you hoping for?" "One that don't feel like surviving is the only thing I'm doing." He let that settle. Then he said, "I can build that with you." "You sure?" He nodded. "If you'll have me." Penelope looked at him, really looked. His face wasn't young anymore, but it was steady, and that steadiness had rooted itself into the corners of her days in ways she hadn't expected. "I don't have a ring," he added quietly. "Or a preacher yet. I don't need either to know what's real." She stepped forward then, laid her hand flat against his chest. His heart beat strong beneath her palm. "I'll marry you," she said, voice clear. "Not because I need saving, but because I want something honest. Something that lasts." He brought one hand up to cradle her cheek, his thumb rough with callus but the touch gentle. "This time," he said, "I won't leave." And she believed him. With Rosie breathing soft in the corner and the fire burning low, they stood in the quiet of that room, two people who had lost too much, finding their way towards something whole. The wedding was held on a mild December morning, the sun rising through a veil of pale cloud that turned the snow-covered hills to soft gold. Penelope stood outside the cabin with her hands tucked into a wool muff, watching the preacher's wagon crest the ridge. Reed clung to her skirt, his cheeks flushed from the cold, while Rosie waited just behind the door, fidgeting in a new calico dress she insisted wasn't warm enough. Dawson had been up before dawn, chopping kindling and shoveling the path clear without a word of complaint. He wore his cleanest shirt, the collar stiff beneath his coat, and had trimmed his beard with the small mirror Penelope kept hung behind the bedroom door. He asked for nothing grand, only a quiet ceremony on the land that had become his home. "I brought what I could," the preacher said as he stepped down from the wagon, holding a parcel of bread wrapped in linen and a small tin of coffee beans. "The Lord don't mind a humble table." Penelope smiled, touched the brim of her bonnet, and welcomed him inside. They were married beside the hearth, with Rosie standing tall on one side and Reed leaning into Dawson's leg on the other. The vows were simple. Penelope didn't wear a veil, and Dawson didn't fumble over his words. When the preacher asked if they would keep to each other in all seasons, Penelope answered before he'd finished the question. Afterward, they shared stew and cornbread by the fire. Rosie handed Dawson a drawing she'd made, a house with smoke curling from the chimney and 4 figures holding hands out front. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. Once the preacher had gone and the children were put to bed, Penelope stood by the window, watching snow begin to fall in slow, silent flakes. "You nervous?" she asked, not turning. Dawson crossed the room, setting his hand gently at her back. "Only about keeping my boots dry come spring." She laughed softly, the sound low and real. "I never pictured this," she said. "Not after everything." "Neither did I," he said. "But I'm grateful it found us anyway." She turned to face him, her hands finding his. "I don't expect ease," she said. "But I expect honesty. And presence." "You'll have both," he said. "Every day." They kissed then, unhurried and warm, the kind of kiss built over time and trust. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, but inside, the cabin was still. Spring came late that year, and with it, the sweet thaw of the ground. Dawson built a new chicken coop with Reed's help, teaching him how to set the boards square. Penelope walked Rosie to the schoolhouse 3 times a week, her lessons growing in number as more families enrolled their children. Some afternoons, Dawson would ride into town for seed or nails. Folks still looked sideways at first, but he didn't flinch under it. He had nothing to prove beyond the life he was already living. One evening, while planting early carrots behind the cabin, Penelope paused to rest a hand on her belly. Dawson noticed but didn't ask not yet. Later, as the sun dipped low and the children chased each other through the meadow, she handed him a folded cloth bundle. He opened it and found a tiny knitted cap. His breath caught. "You sure?" She nodded, eyes shining. "Early September, if I've counted right." He crouched beside her, pressing his forehead to her shoulder. "I'll be ready." They named the child Samuel, after Penelope's father. He was born just before the wheat turned golden, with Rosie fetching water and Reed waiting outside the door, clutching the same drawing he'd made months before. Dawson held the boy first, his hands steady, his eyes wet. The seasons passed. The cabin grew fuller, warmer. Penelope taught through the winters, her voice strong and steady as she stood at the front of the classroom. Dawson worked the land, built a new fence, and repaired the roof before the first snowfall. They read together by lamplight when the work was done, her chair pulled close to his. They didn't speak often of the past. It lived behind them, a quiet weight neither denied nor fed. What they built instead was a life stitched from the small, enduring moments, shared coffee, a mended shirt, a child's laughter drifting through the rafters. On their porch one summer evening, Dawson rocked gently with Samuel in his arms, watching the skies shift to lavender. Penelope leaned beside him, their shoulders touching. "I'm glad you came back," she said. He looked at her, the lines of her face soft in the dusk. "I'm glad you let me." They didn't need more words. They had the land, the children, the firelight, and each other. And that was everything.